Mr. Rod Cardoza. And Rod has a presentation for us, I believe. Rod has a presentation we're going to present for us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's get all set up here. Make sure this works. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
Alaikum salam.
So, that's right, thank you. So we have one gentleman here who knows the reply. So, Christians may be interested to know that this common Arabic greeting that Muslims use around the world is actually more similar to the way Jesus greeted his disciples than the way we greet each other often, right? When the disciples were gathered together, according to John 20:19, Jesus came and he said to them, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Now, most English translations of this verse render Shalom Aleichem as peace be with you. But Jesus wasn't speaking English, was he? He was speaking Hebrew, he was speaking Aramaic, and so what he actually said was, Shalom Aleichem. Salamu alaikum, Shalom Aleichem. Salamu alaikum, Shalom Aleichem. They not only sound similar, but they actually mean exactly the same thing. Peace be upon you. As a Christian, I find it rather remarkable that Muslims around the world, even in lands that don't speak Arabic very much, like in Indonesia, they're greeting each other in ways far more similar to the way Jesus greeted his disciples than the way we greet each other. Good morning. How you doing? Right? How are you? So I grew up in San Jose, and like a number of youth in San Jose, I went to church once every other year. And so I got into a great deal of trouble as a youth, trouble at home, trouble in school, and trouble with the law.
Wow.
Thankfully, a dear friend in high school, introduced some very good news to me. And he invited me to pray a prayer of repentance, to really submit my life to God's rule and reign, rather than me be in control, turn it over to God, as it were, through obedience to Jesus' commands. And so, having succeeded at making such a terrible mess of my life, I figured, it's got to be better, right? And so I went ahead and prayed that prayer. And it's difficult to describe what happened next, but suffice it to say that the mercy and presence of God kind of flooded through me in a way that was palpable, in a way that was deeply moving in an awesome way. And it's like my heart and soul experienced transformation almost instantly, but it took my mind years to catch up at what had transpired, right? So submitting to God's rule and reign was really the beginning of an incredible pilgrimage in my life, which not only led me back to church, but it sent me off to seminary to learn more about God, and it sent me to the university to learn more about mankind, focusing in cultural anthropology. Now, some anthropologists study ancient man through archaeology, right? But I was always more interested to learn about living peoples that I could talk to and interview. And so in 1985, I attended a Gandhian university in North India, Gujarat, and I researched social stratification among Muslims of Ahmedabad. Then later I went to Mindanao, Philippines, where I researched various aspects of Muslim shamanism. And then sometime later, I went back to India to do some ethnographic research on Shiite mourning rituals. Then after getting married, my wife and I moved to New Delhi to study the Urdu language at Delhi University and Jamia Millia Islamia. That's my wife, it's me and my wife near the center of the top there with my Urdu professor and so forth at Delhi University. So years later, we moved to Egypt with 2 children so that I could study Arabic and research the role of Muslim cinematography in teaching Islamic knowledge. Now, if there's one thing I learned in all these international travels and studies, it's that most people really don't understand each other all that well. Misunderstandings abound in all directions. Prejudice and stereotypes are rampant everywhere. Few take time to really understand their neighbors deeply on their terms. And when people don't understand each other well, conflict can easily result. No society is really immune from this dynamic. I'm always amazed to hear false stereotypes about Muslims when I'm among Christian friends in America that I know aren't true, having lived among them abroad, right? But I'm equally amazed when I'm in Muslim-majority lands abroad to hear false stereotypes about Christians. Right? I eventually realized that majority communities tend to be rather ignorant about minorities. Minorities, on the other hand, while they may not understand the majority deeply, they know how not to offend the majority. Minorities have to know how not to offend the majority, right? But majorities, however, rarely go out of their way to learn enough about minorities to minimize social conflict with them. Instead, majorities often expect minorities to assimilate, to change their ways, to get used to it. The irony I experienced after studying the sacred text of Jews, Christians, and Muslims was that all of these sacred texts contain divine commands to love not only our neighbors, but also the strangers among us. As Christians, we know that the two greatest commandments in all, according to Jesus, are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And to quash any debate about who my neighbor is, the very same chapter of Leviticus that Jesus quotes when he says, saying love your neighbor is the second greatest commandment, that very same chapter also includes a command to love the stranger, the foreigner among you, as you love yourself. So therefore, ancient rabbis like Hillel summarized the central message of the law and the prophets as meaning that we must practice goodness and kindness to neighbors and strangers. The Talmud tells a story of a man who came to Hillel saying that he'd convert to Judaism if Hillel could teach him the whole Torah while standing on one leg. Hillel replied, okay. He stood on one foot, and then he said, what is hateful to you, do not do unto others. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go study. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? Jesus taught something very similarly when he said, on these two commandments, that is, to love God and neighbor, depend all the law and the prophets. Now, according to a hadith, which is a sacred text of Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad also spoke similarly when he said, none of you has faith until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. The Quran also teaches kindness to neighbors and strangers. In this ayah, this verse in the Quran says, do good to parents, to kinfolk, orphans, and the poor, the neighbor who is near of kin, the neighbor who is a stranger, the neighbor who is a fellow traveler, and the wayfarer. Okay? And regarding love for God, the Quran says, so invoke the name of thy Lord and devote thyself to him with complete devotion. Now, if we devote ourselves to God with a complete devotion, naturally, we're going to be careful to strive to obey all his commandments, right? Including commandments to love our neighbors and strangers among us. Those who are not doing good to neighbors and strangers arguably are not devoting themselves wholly to God, or in the language of the Bible, they're not loving God. Now, with so many divine commands to do good to neighbors and strangers, why, one wonders, is there so much conflict between Jews, Christians, and Muslims? Instead of letting politicians and religious extremists continue to divide us, we need new ways to get to know each other, new ways to build bridges of understanding and respect. So as was mentioned, I'm the founder and the director of Abrahamic Alliance International, a faith-based nonprofit that unites Jews, Christians, and Muslims to serve the poor, suffering, and marginalized. Now, our alliance acknowledges that our three religions not only share a tremendous amount of common ground, but they also have some very important differences, which some regard as competing or even exclusive truth claims, those differences. Okay? Now, nonetheless, these need not be denied or watered down in order for us to collaborate in obedience to divine commands to care for the poor. All families have disagreements on a variety of things, right? And so too the family of Abraham disagrees on many important issues. Nonetheless, our disagreement need not inhibit our love for each other, nor our cooperation together in doing good. Rather, as we unite to serve the poor in obedience to divine commands, we can also build bridges of understanding and respect between our communities as we get to know each other in friendship. So the mission of Abrahamic Alliance is to unite Jews, Christians, and Muslims for active peace building and poverty relief. So education plays an important role in preparing Jews, Christians, and Muslims for successful collaboration. I teach a seminar called Loving Muslim Neighbors in churches to help prepare Christians to build those bridges of understanding and respect, to address the stereotypes and so forth, the misinformation that's quite popular in the Christian community. Rabbi Reuven Firestone, he's a professor at Hebrew Union College, just completed his first draft of a Loving Muslim Neighbors seminar for synagogues, and God willing, that he's going to be teaching that beginning this year. And this, Rabbi Reuven Firestone, Oxford scholar, travels the world all the time to Doha and around, all around the world at Jewish-Muslim dialogue events, right? Sheikh Hassan Banasra, a Palestinian Muslim peacemaker from Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? More than one good thing. Yeah. So he's preparing to teach a Loving Jewish Neighbors seminar at mosques internationally, both in English and in Arabic. Okay. But it's really our community service events that leave everyone in awe, because they're experiencing a foretaste of the Messianic era of peace to come. Okay. An expectation shared not only by Jews and Christians, but also by Muslims, when swords will be beaten into plowshares and when men will no longer train for war. For example, when Muslim parents see their kids having fun with Jewish and Christian kids, they know that peaceful coexistence is not a naive and distant dream, but a growing and present reality, here and now. Now, before I describe how our events work, let me briefly describe the American context in which, from a Jewish and a Muslim perspective, all right? Now, as you know, both Jews and Muslims are minorities in this country, and irrespective of religion, it's common for most all minorities to suffer discrimination in one form or another. As African Americans know all too well, joining the majority religion of America didn't end the discrimination that they endured. Christians have referred to Jews as Christ killers for centuries, and so Jews have suffered intense discrimination in Christian lands for more than a millennium. This led not only to the pogroms, glimpsed ever so briefly in the classic movie Fiddler on the Roof, but it also contributed to the unbelievable horrors of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. Jews have come a long way in America, but the memory of the Holocaust is still much too near for many to feel entirely secure anywhere other than Israel. And even in Israel, as you know, all Jews don't feel entirely secure, especially as international opinion is growing to support a Palestinian state. So many Jews are happy to expose anti-Semitic stereotypes and improve public opinion of Jewish people, building friendships with non-Jews. Now, for American Muslims, as you know, life has not been easy since 9/11. During the Cold War, Russians were the bad guys in all the movies. But now, the bad guys in all the movies are?
Muslims.
In most all the movies, yeah. And so as a result of this growing anti-Muslim sentiment, mosques in America have been burned. Innocent Muslims have been murdered in hate crimes across the country. Even turban-wearing Sikhs have been murdered in the U.S. because they were mistaken as having been Muslim. Then along comes an opportunity to unite the three communities together in a compassionate event to serve the homeless. This is a big deal, especially to minority communities, to be able to unite with the majority in doing good together, because it communicates so much acceptance, so much a willingness to do good together, right? And then when they find out that the Christians have actually spent some time learning about them, kind of being sensitized to their culture, their worldview. Jewish and Muslim communities are like, wow, really? We have no shortage of mosques and synagogues who want to work with us. The biggest challenge in this country is actually getting churches on board with this, interestingly. We're too busy, I hear a lot. I'm not sure our church is ready for this, I hear a lot. Okay? So I'm not going to go into those details of why some churches give reasons for why they don't want to. They're not sure they want to get involved yet, but I will say that the Bible clearly commands Christians to love our neighbors, as we know. And uniting with Jews and Muslims to serve the poor communicates a tremendous amount of love and acceptance that gives any minority community great hope for their children and grandchildren, that maybe they're not going to experience the kind of discrimination that we endure, right? That's the context, all right? Now, a quick overview of our service events. What happens mostly we do meal service events. And we start with a volunteer orientation, then comes a buddy group discussion, then comes food preparation, then food service to the homeless at a shelter or a soup kitchen, and finally volunteers dine together. So leadership is shared equally at our events by Jewish, Christian, and Muslim volunteers. So for example, after a rabbi gives the opening welcome, then a Muslim leader will talk about our 4 goals for the United Service event, right? And then a Christian leader may explain how we're going to have fun getting to know each other by breaking into small buddy groups of same gender, similar age, different religion, right? And after quickly breaking into buddy groups, volunteers have about 30 minutes to discuss some icebreaker questions. And these questions have been carefully designed to start with some kind of lighthearted sharing, evoke a few laughs, and then just go a tad deeper to share something meaningful about maybe one's favorite holiday or a verse that inspired them, a verse in their sacred text that inspired them to serve those less fortunate than themselves. And after 30 minutes of getting acquainted, buddy groups then work together for about an hour to prepare the meal, a kosher and halal meal. And then all volunteers convoy together in their buddy groups over to the local soup kitchen or shelter to serve together, face to face with the homeless. And after serving all guests, volunteers sit down in buddy groups to dine together, enjoying a kosher and halal meal together. You've worked for nearly 4 hours, you're tired, you want to sit down, and you get to enjoy a kosher and halal meal with your buddy. Now, as you know, those of you who kind of looked into New Testament dynamics, that table fellowship was a challenge for the earliest church. Big challenge, because you had kosher observant Jewish followers of Jesus, and you had Gentile followers of Jesus who could care less about keeping kosher, right? But we've solved this issue at our meal service events by educating all how to prepare a meal that will meet the dietary purity requirements for both Muslim and Jewish communities. Talk about love. The Muslim and Jewish communities, when they find out, when they see the great pains that the other 2 communities are taking to meet their stringent dietary requirements, blows them away. So in only 4 hours, volunteers have gotten acquainted in buddy groups, worked together, served together, and dined together. And it's therefore not uncommon at our events for volunteers to arrive as strangers, but to leave as friends, sometimes even exchanging contact information to get together at each other's homes or at a cafe for coffee, dinner, what have you. So now that you have a good overview of how our events work, I want to show you a brief video that kind of brings it all together. And this is a video of an event that took place between San Jose's oldest mosque and largest mosque, the South Bay Islamic Association, the Lincoln Glen Church, and Congregation Sinai, conservative synagogue in San Jose.